All right. Good afternoon. This is People versus Police, file 2149955FY1. Mr. Settles is here on behalf of the defendant, Mr. Tholen, for the people. And this is the date set for a preliminary examination. Is there anything we need to take up before we get started, Mr. Settles?
Judge, could we sequester witnesses?
Any objection to that, Mr. Tholen?
None, Your Honor. All
right. I'm going to guess, is it Detective Bershave is the officer in charge?
He is, Your Honor. And then Dr. Prallo is an expert that we will be calling today, so I would ask that he remain in as well.
No objection.
Okay. So if the other witnesses could please, I guess, what's the best way for them to not hear the testimony?
Your Honor, I don't have an objection to sequestration, but Officer Snyder will be our first witness, which only leaves one other witness to be sequestered. That would be Officer Nowland.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to put Officer Nowland in a breakout room then. And hang on just a second. God. All right. So you'll be in a breakout room, Officer Nowland. You'll need to accept an invitation there, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Settles?
No, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Tholen, anything we need to take up before we get started?
Nothing from the people, Your Honor.
All right. Go ahead and call your first witness then.
Officer Snyder, would you please raise your right hand for the court to swear you in?
All right. Officer, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I swear.
All right. You can put your hand down. Go ahead, Mr. Tholen.
Would you please state your name, sir?
Ben Snyder.
How do you spell your last name?
SNYDER.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a police officer with the Traverse City Police.
What's your current assignment with the Traverse City Police Department?
I'm assigned to road patrol.
I'd like to go back to September 4th of 2020. Were you dispatched to the address of 729 Webster Street?
Yes, I was.
Is that located within the city limits of Traverse City?
Yes, it is.
And in Grand Traverse County?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose of your dispatch to 729 Webster Street?
Myself and other city officers were dispatched there due to what was reported as some sort of narcotics overdose.
What did you see when you arrived?
When we arrived, we went upstairs and we saw what appeared to be a female subject, unconscious, kind of blue colored in the face, with a male subject on top of her performing CPR.
Were you able to identify this female subject and the male subject?
Yes, we were.
Who did you identify the female subject as?
Miss Pilaris, I believe was her name.
Okay. And the male subject, who was that?
Zachary Fleece.
You see Zachary Fleece in this Zoom courtroom?
I do.
Would you please identify for the recording what he is wearing?
Yes, it looks like it's a smaller screen. It looks like a lighter blue button-down shirt, collared.
Is there a name attached to his Zoom picture?
Yes, it says Zachary Fleece.
I'd ask the record to reflect that the witness has indicated the defendant as having been present in the home that night.
All right, well, the record will reflect the witnesses identifying Mr. Fleece. Is there any objection to that, Mr. Settles?
No.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Tholen.
What did you do after making that first initial observation of the defendant performing CPR on Ms. Pelouris?
Officer Nolan and I told Mr. Fleece to just kind of step away from it.
Hang on just one moment. There is another person in the meeting, Elizabeth Pelouris.
That would be the victim.
And what's that?
That would be the victim. Your Honor.
This is not going to be a witness then?
Correct.
Okay, so there's no reason to sequester them. Okay. All right, so go ahead.
Officer Nolan and I told Mr. Fleece to step away from the female. At that time, we put her body down onto the floor, at which time I started performing chest compressions. Another officer on scene, Officer Core, who isn't here today, was getting a dose of naloxone ready.
What type of condition was Ms. Pelouris in as you were doing chest compressions on her?
She was blue to the face, and she had a cold touch to her skin. She was obviously not breathing at all.
Did anybody else arrive on scene?
A short time later, medical staff with North Flight as well as Traverse City Fire Department arrived on scene and took over chest compressions and other life-saving measures.
What did you, Officer Nowland, and Officer Core do at that point?
At that time, I assisted with rotating in for chest compressions with the medical staff, and Officer Nowland and Officer Core were, I believe, out in another room interviewing other people in the residence as to what they saw or might have saw.
Was the Narcan or the naloxone effective at reviving Ms. Pelouris?
It was not.
Were the chest compressions or CPR effective at reviving Ms. Pelouris?
No, they were not.
Was Ms. Pelouris pronounced deceased?
Yes, she was.
Would you please tell the judge how you know that?
Medical staff on scene made contact with a doctor at Munson Medical Center, and they declared a time of death. I don't know the time of death off the top of my head. I'd have to refer to my report for that.
Was it while Ms. Pelouris was still inside the home at 729 Webster?
Yes, sir, it was.
And while you were still present at the scene?
Yes, sir.
How long were you in the home that night, approximately?
From the arrival time until a little after midnight, approximately.
That would be roughly 3 hours. Is that approximately correct?
Yes, correct.
What were you doing for the time after she was pronounced deceased? Why were you still there?
2 detectives from the city police responded to the scene. I'm an evidence technician with the city police, and I was assisting both the detectives with gathering evidence from the room.
What did you collect from the room?
We got numerous electronic devices, as well as I believe it was a white powdery substance from the southeast corner. There was a medicine table over there that was collected.
Did you locate any, other than the white substance, did you locate any other controlled substances?
I believe there was a syringe, but I do not think there was anything in it. It might have been used, if memory serves.
Do you know whether that white powdery substance was eventually tested?
That I'm not sure of. That might have been something the detectives followed up with.
Very good. I don't have any more questions for you, Officer Snyder. Mr. Settles may have some for you.
All right, Mr. Settles, any questions?
Yes, I think the question was, did you find any other controlled substances in the house? In the syringe, okay. Anything else?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
Okay. That's it. I don't have anything further. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, officer. May this witness be excused from his subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor, and I would actually ask that Officer Nowland be excused as well.
All right, any objection to that, Mr. Settles?
No, Judge.
All right, at this time, I'll bring Officer Nowland back in. And while I'm waiting for the breakout room to close, I want to mention to Mr. Fleece, if at any time you wish to speak with your attorney, such as to share questions you'd like him to ask or for any reason, let me know and I'll put you in a breakout room with him and you can discuss that privately, okay?
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Sure.
So Officer Snyder, you're free to go. You're also free to stay if you'd like to watch the rest of it. It's entirely up to you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Are we still waiting on the breakout room to close?
Yeah, it can take up to 60 seconds or more for those to close out. I don't know why, but there he is. Okay, so Officer Nowland, your testimony is not going to be needed today. So you've been excused from your subpoena. You're free to either stay or go and get back to work, I guess.
Thank you, sir.
Or
I appreciate
get home to chores, whatever the case. So,
heading back to work. Thank you, sir.
all right. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Tholen, next witness, please.
Dr. Prallo, you'll be the next witness. If you would, please raise your right hand for the court to swear you in.
All right, Dr. Prallo, are you able to hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Right. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Tholen.
Would you please state your name, sir?
My name is Joseph A. Prallo, Prahlow.
What do you do for a living?
I am a forensic pathologist at Western Michigan University Homer Straker MD School of Medicine in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
As part of that position, did you have occasion to conduct an autopsy on an Alexandria pylorus?
Yes, I did.
How does that come about that Homer Straker Medicine is doing autopsies for a Grand Traverse County case?
Well, we actually perform autopsies and function officially as the medical examiner's office for several Michigan counties. I think it's over 12 now, including Grand Traverse County. So as part of our contract with Grand Traverse County, we function as the medical examiner's office. So we have medical examiners, investigators that work in the county. And then if there are cases that require a medical examiner, our investigators investigate those, go to the scene, photograph, work with law enforcement, work with medical folks, et cetera, and gather information about the case. And then depending on the case type, if an autopsy is deemed necessary, then the body is actually transported to Kalamazoo for autopsy. And that's how this case occurred.
What type of education, training, and experience do you have to become a forensic pathologist?
I have a college degree, a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and Biology. I also have an MD degree from Indiana University School of Medicine. I then did a 5-year residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. I then did a forensic pathology fellowship at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas, Texas. I am board certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology. And I'm licensed to practice medicine in the states of Michigan and Indiana.
Have you previously been qualified as an expert in the field of forensic pathology?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, at this point, I would move to qualify Dr. Prallo as an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
Any objection, Mr. Settles?
No.
All right, so I will admit Dr. Prallo as an expert in forensic pathology. Go ahead, Mr. Tholen.
What is the process that you went through in conducting the autopsy for this case?
Well, first of all, we review the investigative report by our medical examiner investigator. We then perform an external examination, which involves photography, documenting all sorts of things on the outside of the body, including medical treatment, etc. We then do what's referred to as an internal examination, where we remove the organs of the body and dissect them, looking for any evidence of disease or injury. During the course of the autopsy, we also will collect various bodily fluids for toxicology testing, looking for drugs and chemicals. In many cases, we will also look at the tissues under the microscope to look for any evidence of disease or injury. And ultimately, at the end of the procedure in the morgue itself, we either have a pretty good idea of what the cause of death is based on anatomic findings such as trauma or natural disease, or we don't yet know, and we rely on some of the additional testing that we do, such as toxicology. And then that reporting usually takes several weeks. We send the specimens to the toxicology laboratory, in this case, National Medical Services, NMS labs, and then we receive the toxicology report. And as with any other drug-related case, once we get those toxicology tests done and we've looked at everything else under the microscope, et cetera, then we look at all the findings and then make a final determination as to the cause of death. And that's what occurred in this case. This was a quote unquote toxicology case. The autopsy in the morgue did not reveal an obvious cause of death, so we were waiting on the toxicology results. And then in this case, the toxicology results that came back testing her blood revealed the presence of substances that were considered at high enough concentrations to explain death.
Did you ultimately come to a conclusion on the cause of death?
Yes, I did.
What is the cause of death conclusion that you came to?
The cause of death was the combined toxic effects of fentanyl and alprazolam.
How did you come to that ultimate conclusion?
Well, ultimately, it goes back to what I just described. We don't have an anatomical explanation for death. And then
can you explain what you mean by that? You don't have
so we don't find injuries or disease processes that are explanatory of death. So, for example, if someone's in a car crash and they have head trauma that explains death, that's an anatomic explanation for death. Or if someone has a myocardial infarct, that's an anatomic, something I can see with my eyes at the autopsy that explains death. Very frequently with drug-related deaths, we do not have an anatomic cause of death identified when we are done with the body in the morgue. And that's what happened in this case. And in those cases, then we rely on other testing, very frequently the toxicology testing. In this case, the toxicology testing came back with levels of fentanyl specifically that were 7.0 nanograms per milliliter, which is considered in the lethal range of fentanyl. She also had alprazolam or Xanax at a level of 21 nanograms per milliliter. That is within therapeutic range, but since both fentanyl and alprazolam have similar mechanisms of action as depressants, respiratory central nervous system depressants, we can't very well ignore the fact that there's a small amount of alprazolam there. So that's why I listed the cause of death as the combined toxic effects of both of those substances, fentanyl and alprazolam.
You mentioned the trade name for alprazolam. What's that again?
Xanax.
Do you know what schedule under the Controlled Substances Act alprazolam and fentanyl are?
Well, alprazolam is a DEA Schedule 4 second generation benzodiazepine. Fentanyl is a DEA Schedule 2 synthetic morphine substitute used for legal purposes as an anesthetic agent or an analgesic agent.
Are you able to separate which one would be more responsible, or is there a medical way to determine which one would be more responsible or a more substantial cause?
The best we can do in cases like this is look at the levels and see where they are in relationship to other cases that we know of and what's in the literature as far as causing death. I already mentioned, I believe, that the alprazolam level was within actually relatively low levels, consistent with therapeutic levels. By itself, alprazolam would not have resulted in death in this case. Fentanyl is within the lethal range reported in the literature, and based on my experience dealing with fentanyl-related deaths. And that level of fentanyl at 7.0 nanograms per milliliter is well above what would be considered a therapeutic range for someone who was using fentanyl for pain control. So based on that, I can't ignore the fact that the alprazolam is there, but if asked, as I believe you just did, I would opine that the fentanyl was the major reason for death in this case, and but for the fentanyl, death would likely not have occurred.
Very good, Dr. Prello. I don't have any more questions for you right now. Mr. Settles may have some.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Settles.
What is the therapeutic range for fentanyl?
So it depends on the dosage, but for a heavy dosage, someone who is routinely taking fentanyl, in the classic situation where fentanyl is prescribed would be by the skin patches. And those range anywhere from 20, and it's a rate of delivery of drug, 25 micrograms per hour of drug delivered. They range from 25 to 100 microgram patches. And according to the literature, people that have that high dosage where they're repeatedly taking or using the skin patches at the 100 microgram per hour patches, the range is about 1.9 to 3.8 nanograms per milliliter. So we're almost at 7.0 nanograms per milliliter, twice that level. And there's a very, very narrow therapeutic range for fentanyl. Once you get up above the therapeutic range, especially in someone who is not a tolerant user or someone who's used the drug repeatedly and built up some tolerance, that therapeutic range is very narrow, and you get up above that therapeutic range and death can occur very quickly.
Thank you. I don't have anything for them.
All right. Mr. Tholen, did you have any follow-up from that?
I do not, Your Honor.
All right. And I want to check in again, Mr. Fleece. Did you have any reason you want to discuss anything with your attorney in private, or any questions that you would like him to ask that you want to discuss with him?
At this moment, I do not believe so, unless he does.
Oh.
I'm not shy. May seem like it right now, but I'm not shy. If I want to meet with you, I'll tell the judge you need him.
Okay. Well, if at any point, again, if you want to talk with your attorney in private, just raise your hand or give me some signal or speak up and let me know that. Okay.
Don't
All right.
be shy.
So no other questions for Dr. Prello. Thank you for being here this afternoon. You're free to go if you like. And unless, is there any reason to keep Dr. Prello under subpoena?
Not from the people, Your Honor.
No, thank you, Judge.
Okay. Thanks again, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Tholen, witnesses.
Detective Vershave will be our third and final witness.
Okay, so Detective, if you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Tholen.
Would you please state your name, sir?
Matt Vershave.
Could you please spell your last name?
It's VSCHAEVE.
I don't know if it's just on my end or if other people are seeing connection issues with Detective Vershave.
Good.
We are.
Well, I'm able to hear okay. It might help if he leans into the microphone just a little bit closer. But Mr. Settles, are you able to hear okay?
Yeah, I can hear okay.
It does seem as though he's moving slower, as if there's some delay in the feed or something. But let's give it a try, and if there's any problem, we'll deal with it.
Very good. What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a detective with the Traverse City Police Department.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
Approximately 20 years.
What's your current assignment with the Traverse City Police Department?
I'm a general detective. I'm assigned to investigate the more major crimes that our department deals with.
How did you become involved in the investigation of this case?
I received a call off duty from Captain Gillis, I believe, requesting the presence of detectives to assist with this scene.
What did you do after getting that call?
Detective Safradini was able to respond a lot quicker than I was, and I arrived on scene at approximately midnight, so the early morning hours of the 5th. And Detective Safradini had briefed me on the situation that had occurred thus far.
Could you please describe the investigation that you embarked on at that point?
At that point, we requested that Mr. Fleece come down to the police station so we could gain further insight and details into this investigation. At that time, I did have the opportunity to interview Mr. Fleece at the Law Enforcement Center in the early morning hours of the 5th and later again in the afternoon hours of the 5th. During those interviews, I learned from Mr. Fleece that he had purchased a quantity of Xanax and Oxycontin the evening prior, so the late hours of the 3rd, for him and Miss Polaris to utilize from a person at that time known as Jake.
Very good. So I have a quick question now to interrupt you.
Sure.
This Mr. Fleece that you spoke with in the early morning hours of the 5th and then in the afternoon hours of the 5th, is that the same Mr. Fleece that's in this Zoom courtroom?
Yes.
All right. Did you speak with him about the death of Ms. Polaris?
We did.
What did he tell you specifically about what his thoughts were on how she died?
He believed that she received a laced or something other than the Oxycontin that they believed they were ingesting. The Oxycontin may have been laced.
Did he tell you why he thought that the Oxycontin he had purchased from Jake was laced?
He did. He said the consistency of the pill was not what he remembered. When it was ground, it was not consistent with what he remembered the Oxycontin to be.
Did you talk to him about why he was grinding the pill?
Yes.
Why was he grinding the pill, according to what he told you?
They ingested it by snorting.
Is they meaning him and Ms. Polaris?
Yes.
Did you talk to him about, or did he say anything about what he thought it might have been laced with? I'm not sure if I asked you that.
He did. He thought it may have been fentanyl.
Did you talk to him about whether Ms. Polaris may have gotten substances from some other person besides him?
I did. Mr. Fleece indicated that he was the primary supplier for drugs between he and Ms. Polaris, and did not believe that she would have had access or the ability to get it without him.
Did he tell you how much OxyContin or oxycodone and Xanax or alprazolam he had obtained from Jake?
The initial count that he gave me during the first interview was 2 OxyContins and 10 Xanax bars. And later it remained at 2 OxyContins and approximately 15 Xanax bars.
Did he tell you what happened to those 2 OxyContins and 15 Xanax bars?
He indicated that he and Ms. Polaris used the entire quantity of the OxyContins.
Did he tell you what happened with the Xanax bars?
He indicated that they did use some, and later indicated that when paramedics arrived to attempt to revive Ms. Polaris, he flushed them at that point down the toilet.
Detective, I don't think I have any more questions for you. Mr. Settles may have some.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Settles.
Well, yeah. What is a Xanax bar?
I believe it is a small quantity of lorazepam. Xanax is the, I guess, trade name.
Right, they come in a bar, like almost like a candy bar. Is that right? I break them off, I eat one?
I believe it refers to the small rectangular size of their pill,
Okay,
like a small
so
bar.
if I buy 30 bars, what is that, 30 pills? Is that what that means?
I believe so.
And what are they, two milligrams or whatever they are? Did he say what they were?
I believe these specifically were 10 milligrams. I don't know the quantities that they routinely come in.
All right. And he said he got those from this guy, Jake, the night before. No, that evening, right? He went, is that what he said to you?
The evening of the 3rd. This incident occurred on the 4th.
Okay. And after he did that, you learned that Jake came over that night, came to Webster Street that night to sell more drugs. Is that right?
In a later interview with Mr. Fleece, that is correct.
All right. Now, but Fleece didn't tell us who Jake sold drugs to when he came to the house. There were other people in the house, right?
Besides himself, I don't know who else Jake saw in the house.
All right. There was Aaron. He lived in the house. He was a guy that was there, right?
Yes.
And another guy, I forget his name. Some Joe was in the bedroom when you arrived, right?
I'd have to refer to the report, but when I was there, I don't believe so.
Did you interview Aaron?
No, I did not.
Okay. Okay. Did Mr. Fleece tell you who Jake sold drugs to when he came to the house that evening?
I believe he came to see Mr. Fleece and Miss Polaris.
Okay, but that's your belief based upon an assumption that's how it worked. Is that right?
I can refer to my report. It's a specific part of the interview with Mr. Fleece. I don't recall off the top of my head if that is exactly what he said, but I'd be glad to look for you.
Okay, but you don't recall Fleece saying, yeah, Jake came over because I called him and he came over to sell me more drugs because we needed more drugs.
I do believe that was part of Mr. Fleece's interview. There were several acknowledgments from Mr. Fleece about when he actually contacted Jake. It started downtown and then later ended up at his house. So there are some definite different times that he contacted or met with Jake. Like I said, I'd be glad to refer to my report to find out exactly what was said.
Please, can you do that?
Yep. If you have my report in front of you, I can read it to you verbatim and point you to the page.
Yeah, that'd be great if I'm missing it. I appreciate that. I have
Supplement
got-
number supplement number 6, page 2, near the bottom. I asked Fleece once again how many OxyContin Jake brought to his house. Fleece stated, I don't recall. I asked Fleece if it was possible that Jake brought him more at that time at his house, at which time Fleece stated, yeah, it's possible. Fleece then stated, I just don't remember having an extra amount of them.
Okay. And that's on recording, so, right? That's
Yes,
on
sir.
recorded anyway. Okay.
Yes, sir.
You know, if Jake went to the house the next day.
I do not.
You know who was in the home when the death was reported?
At the time the call was made by Mr. Fleece, I believe it was Mr. Fleece and Miss Polaris.
You don't know if anyone else was in the home at that time.
According to Mr. Fleece, it was he and Miss Polaris.
You don't know if road patrol had just interviewed somebody was there that was there. You didn't hear anything like that from your road patrol?
I don't know specifically talking about when the Miss Polaris was found by Mr. Fleece and the incident was reported. I believe it was only he and Miss Polaris. I don't have any indication to believe otherwise.
You know if there was anyone else in that house with Miss Polaris during the daytime hours?
I do not.
Do you know if Mr. Fleece was with Miss Polaris during the daytime hours?
Mr. Fleece indicated he was there until he had to leave for work during the 4th is the day we're speaking of.
Have you confirmed that?
With his cellular records and the interviews, I have no reason to believe otherwise at this point.
So as far as you know, there'd be well, how long do you believe that, from looking at cell phone records and such, how long do you believe, or what hours do you believe that Fleece was not at Webster Street and Polaris was?
I believe he was not there from the time he left for work until the time that he arrived back prior to reporting this incident.
You know what those hours would be?
I can give you an approximation.
Thank you.
Give me a moment to refer the timeline here.
Thank you.
While the officer's looking through his records, we're going to take about a 5-minute break here.
Very good.
Thank you, Judge.
Yep. So let's say 2:35.
Thank you, Judge.
As soon as I find the answer, they take a break.
Take your time. Oh, I got to stand up for a second.
How it goes.
I guess I better turn off my picture while I'm standing up. Got a suffering sciatica, right?
All right, let's continue with the examination. Go ahead.
To finish answering Mr. Settle's question, during with Mr. Fleece, he indicated that he believed he left his house at approximately 3 p.m. or sometime after 3 p.m. and was gone approximately 3.5 hours while he was at work. Information found on Mr. Fleece's phone, as well as Polaris's phone, supported that. So I do believe that Mr. Fleece was gone during that time frame.
From about what, 3 till 7:30?
That is what he indicated, yes.
Okay, okay. And all
Well,
right.
3.5 hours would be 6:30, wouldn't it?
Not me, Judge. You know how I act.
He believes
Depends
he
on
was,
if you owe me money or I owe you money.
Well, what is your testimony, Mr. Detective? You said from 3 till about 3.5 hours after that, so that'd make it 6:30.
approximations. Mr. Fleece did believe he was gone until sometime after 7:30.
Ah, okay. So 4.5 hours. Go ahead, Mr. Settles.
Thank you. Now, and when you looked at Polaris's phone, you saw that she had Facebook contacts and other contacts, some other contacts for this guy, Jake Cullen. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm looking at Sup 8, your page 2.
Yes, she did have a contact from Mr. Cullen.
Okay. Do you have any reason to believe that she'd have some relationship with Cullen? I don't know, a past employee, friend, something like that. Why she would have that contact on her phone?
I'm sorry if I didn't hear the end of that question.
All right. Do you have any evidence or knowledge of some relationship between her and Cullen that would explain why she has that contact on her phone?
I don't.
Have you interviewed Cullen?
I have not.
Got any evidence of who might have been there during that, what, 3.5 or 4 hours when Fleece isn't there?
I don't.
I don't have anything else. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Tholen, any additional questions for Detective O'Shea?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, then do you have any additional witnesses, Mr. Tholen?
No additional witnesses, Your Honor.
Mr. Settles, any evidence for the defense?
No, thank you, Judge.
All right, argument motion first, Mr. Tholen.
Yes, Your Honor. I would move the court to bind over based on the testimony that we have presented from Officer Snyder, Dr. Prallo, and from Detective Vershave. I would move the court to bind over on both of the originally charged counts, and I'll go through those in order. Count 1 is actually a very simple or short statute compared to most other statutes. So if you were to look at it, which is MCL 750.317A, the entirety of the statute is actually only one sentence. And it states that a person who delivers a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance other than marijuana to another person in violation of Section 7401 of the Public Health Code that is consumed by that person or any other person and that causes the death of that person or other person is guilty of a felony. The testimony that you heard from Dr. Prallo is that fentanyl, which was the cause of death, is a Schedule II controlled substance, thus meaning we're in the right ballpark with this statute. You heard testimony from Officer Snyder and Dr. Prallo that Ms. Pelouris was pronounced deceased, did die from the ingestion of likely this fentanyl. Dr. Prallo's testimony was that it was the combined effects of the alprazolam and fentanyl, but the major contributor was Schedule II controlled substance of fentanyl. The testimony you heard from Detective Vershave was that the defendant admitted that on September 3rd, he had purchased 2 OxyContin or oxycodone pills, as well as multiple Xanax or alprazolam pills. He testified that he believed that these had been ground up so that the two could snort them, so that the defendant and Ms. Pelouris could snort them, and that he was suspicious that there may have been fentanyl mixed in or laced onto the OxyContin pills, because when he ground them up, the consistency didn't feel as he remembered. So we have indications that the defendant had purchased the fentanyl and alprazolam that was ingested by Ms. Pelouris. There was also testimony from Detective Vershave that the defendant did not believe she had purchased or consumed drugs from any other source. So not only do we have the proximity of the defendant buying them on September 3rd and sharing them with Ms. Pelouris, but we also have his belief that she didn't obtain controlled substances from anyone else. Based on that testimony, meaning the death, the controlling of this particular substance, the sharing, the link to fentanyl, and the defendant's belief that she had not gotten the substance from anyone else, I believe that there is probable cause for the court to bind over on count 1. As far as count 2, Officer Snyder testified that they did not find pills when he searched that room, or he testified that he did not find any other pills, would be more accurate. And in his interview with Detective Vershave, the defendant admitted that he had flushed the Xanax bars or the alprazolam down the toilet. I believe that meets the elements for count 2, which is tampering with evidence, is that he knowingly and intentionally removed or destroyed evidence to be offered in a future official proceeding in a criminal case where the crime was punishable by a maximum imprisonment of more than 10 years and delivery causing death is more than 10 years. So the defendant's knowing and intentional destruction of those pills, you can infer that that was for a reason, and that was so that he would not get in trouble with any sort of court proceeding. I do know from past experience that the definition of official proceeding is expansive. It's whether it's the case has been initiated or not. I believe there's probable cause on count 2 and would ask the court to bind over on both of the originally charged counts. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tholen. Mr. Settles, argument.
Judge, to accept that we know, okay, we have experts, yeah, that's how she died, fentanyl. That we can accept. But that these oxy pills that Fleece bought, that's fentanyl, that's a stretch. And the stretch is that we got some guy that's done oxy before. We don't know how much he's done it. We don't know if this guy does oxy every day, every 2 days, once a month. He did it 6 years ago, 6 months ago. And he chops it. And he notices a difference. Than whatever his experience was before. And he somehow opines that it could be fentanyl. And the reason the opine is that any drug I take today could be fentanyl. Anytime I buy a drug off the street, that's the word on the street. But for him to cut that and say, okay, with this, because it's harder, softer, you name it. Because of that, this now has attributes of fentanyl. I know that because I'm familiar with how fentanyl cuts. I understand a guy might say he's got an opinion, but for law to accept that as a legal connection, that's different. I got an opinion about a car. You question me, find out I know nothing about cars, right? And my opinion becomes just about zero. But I render an opinion about cars because I drive them. So that's the stretch. So I'm going to argue there is not probably evidence that he probably gave her fentanyl. And I know this is not beyond a reasonable doubt standard. I don't know how you get to probably based upon an opinion of some guy that, because he takes a drug, that he's going to know not only what all the attributes of that particular drug are, but now what are the attributes that he's familiar with fentanyl that he can now identify this as fentanyl. Thank you, Judge.
All right, any response, Mr. Tholen?
I do not have a response, Your Honor.
All right, hang on a minute here. All right, so based on the evidence presented today, there's no question about the cause of death in this case. The medical examiner, forensic pathologist testified that the victim in this case, Ms. Baloris, died of from both the toxic level of fentanyl as well as the Xanax in combination with that. Even though the Xanax was at a therapeutic level in combination with the fentanyl, he said he testified that both are central nervous system depressants and would act in combination, but the fentanyl alone would have caused the death because of the toxic level. But he could attribute the cause of death to both. For delivery of a controlled substance causing death, it's necessary that the prosecution prove, and at this hearing, prove by that it is probable that the defendant caused the death in this case, and that the death was the result of the fentanyl. But delivery in this case is not contested, at least as far as the fact that the defendant delivered oxycodone, or what he thought were oxycodone oxycontin pills and Xanax to the victim. Second, that the substance was in fact a controlled substance, and there's toxicology reports that indicate Ms. Polaris did have the substances defendant confessed to, the alprazolam or Xanax in her system. Apparently there was, I don't believe the doctor testified he found Oxycontin. What he found instead was a toxic level of fentanyl. But the jury instructions only indicate that the defendant knew that the substance was a controlled substance, and he knew he was delivering a controlled substance, and that substance was consumed by Ms. Polaris, and that the cause of death was the consumption of that controlled substance. So in addition, this controlled substance must be a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance, and there is testimony from Dr. Pralow that both substances are in fact Schedule 2 controlled substances. Now, the defendant indicated that he believed that based on his own grinding up the pill, that that it wasn't what he expected, and suspected when he was interviewed by the detective that it was fentanyl. But the jury instructions only require that he knew he was delivering a controlled substance. And I'm not sure whether Mr. Settle's argument is that, well, he didn't know it was fentanyl, he thought it was oxy. But I don't see where it was required that he know that. And in fact, he did express some indication that he believed it may have been fentanyl because of grinding it up and finding it had a different consistency than what he expected. And it may be that the statute is written this way because so often these days, you never know what is going to be in a controlled substance or something you believe is a controlled substance. In fact, my understanding is when people buy heroin these days, they're really buying fentanyl laced with a cutting agent. So that's my suspicion of why it's written that way. But the defendant obviously delivered a substance to Ms. Paloris that was a Schedule II controlled substance. That's clear from the toxicology results. He admitted he bought it from this Jake. He consumed it with Ms. Paloris. He helped grind it up so that they could snort it. And when the medical folks arrived, he flushed the Xanax down the toilet to, the only reasonable inference there is to conceal evidence of a crime. The crime in this case is a 10-year or more offense, the delivery of controlled substance causing death. And it's clear that there was Xanax or alprazolam in the victim's system from the toxicology report. So there's also I guess the body of the crime is established from that fact as well. So I am going to bind the defendant over as charged. And let's see, let's go to the circuit court arraignment at this time. Mr. Settles, do you wish to proceed with circuit court arraignment?
Judge, I'd like to waive it. I don't know if I could do that. I would like to waive a reading of the charge and keep my not guilty, or Mr. Fleece's
All
not
right,
guilty.
so you've no doubt discussed the nature of the charges and maximum penalties with your client?
Yes.
And how does your client plead at this time?
Not guilty.
And so I will enter a not guilty plea on behalf of the defendant. Defendant has waived reading of the complaint or the information. So the defendant is bound over to the circuit court to appear next on August 6th. That's at 1 p.m. for the circuit court pretrial conference. All right. Is there anything else that we need to take up at this time, Mr. Settles or Mr. Tholen?
I'm good.
Nothing that I'm aware of, Your Honor.
All right. Am I correct that the defendant has a prescription for Suboxone? Because I have these test results showing both buprenorphine and THC. I'm aware the defendant has a medical marijuana card, so I don't think there's anything I can do to restrict his use of THC at this time. But I wasn't aware of the buprenorphine, or maybe I just forgot.
He should have a script for it. That has been throughout the police report.
Okay.
I did also see it in the
All
police report. That's the only information.
Okay. So anything else for the people?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right. So bond will be continued. And is there anything else we need to take up before I let you go?
No, thank you.
No thanks,
Thank
Judge.
you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And we're all set for today. Feel free to sign off, Mr. Fleece.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm free to go, Judge?
Yes.
All right, see ya.
Very good. And I will be back in half an hour.
See you then. Are you off live?